Hey, this is Forrest with Minor Drama Studio, and I am doing a walkthrough with our SendBlender plugin. SendBlender is a wet-dry mix knob for use with parallel processing effects chains. I'm just going to jump straight into a demo to kind of show why you would want that in the first place. I'm working with Ableton Live 12. But everything you see, you should be able to translate to whatever your particular DAW is. I have a little loop that I've cooked up here for us to work with. I'll just go ahead and play that so you can hear the sounds we're going to be working on. Okay, so pretty simple loop. There's only 3 tracks here, but it should be something for us to try some things out with. So I'm going to do some parallel compression on this loop to kind of bring the dynamic range down a little bit, and also bring a lot of cohesion and glue into the sounds. So I'm using TDR Kotelnikov. This is a free plugin. It's a great bus compressor. I've dialed in some fairly aggressive peak compression settings. So I'm going to play this first. You'll notice that the transients are brought down quite a bit, but it does bring a lot of cohesion and glue. It kind of gets the beat kind of breathing all as one sound rather than being so separated. Let me just go ahead and play that so you can kind of hear it. So like I said, it's kind of pumping in a nice way, but we do lose a bit more transient than I think we want to, especially on the snare sounds and maybe a little bit on the kick. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to blend in some of the dry signal to try and get some of the transient energy back. To start, I'm just going to do it using TDR Kotelnikov's built-in wet-dry mix knob. A lot of compressors have this, and if all you're doing is compression, it's really all you need. So first, let's just do that and see what that sounds like. So somewhere around 70-75% is I think where it should be. We kind of get some of the snap back in the snare, but kind of retaining a lot of that glue that we got from the compression. So like I said, if all you're doing is parallel compression with nothing else, then and your compressor has a wet-dry mix knob, some of them don't, but most do these days, then you can just do it like that, and it sounds pretty good actually. But but I'm going to do this a different way. I'm going to do it using SendBlender instead, and I'll explain why in a minute. So first, I'm just going to set this compressor back to full wet, so we get just a compressed signal out of it. And I'm going to set up a second track. The second track is where we're going to do the parallel processing and leave the dry track completely dry. So basically, I'm going to move this compressor over to this second track. Bump it up front there. Okay, so, and then I'm going to route the the dry track into this wet processed track. And so now when I play this, we're still doing the compression, but now we're doing it over on the second track, this process track. Right, okay, so the dry track is completely routed into the wet track. And now I'm going to bring up SendBlender. SendBlender is also on the wet process track. It's after the compressor. And SendBlender then has access to the wet signal already. In order for it to act like a wet-dry mix knob, it needs access to both the wet and the dry signal. So the way that SendBlender does this is it wants the dry signal on the side chain. So I'm going to route that dry track into the side chain on SendBlender. And now you'll see when we play this, SendBlender's blend control is now acting as the wet-dry mix knob for the compressed signal. So that's full dry, and that's full wet. And this is no different from using TDR Kotelnikov's wet dry control, right? Okay, but now we're doing it in SendBlender. Okay, so why do we want to do that? Well, you want to do that if you want to do some parallel processing with more than one plugin. So if we want to now do some additional processing on this compressed signal, if we were to do that, the wet dry mix knob in Kotelnikov would then just be operating on the compressor, but not any additional processing that we do. So for example, and this is really the use case that I designed SendBlender for, a lot of times if I'm doing some aggressive compression like that, I like to put an EQ after the compressor. The reason I like to do this is because it gives us an opportunity to now, in addition to shaping the dynamics of the track, we can shape the tone. But by EQing the compressed signal, we can shape the tone in some pretty interesting ways. Because again, with this compressed signal, the transients are really heavily subdued in the compressed signal, which means any EQ that we apply to the compressed signal is affecting the sustains and the lower level sounds much more than it's affecting the transients, because we're getting most of the transient information from the dry signal when we blend that back in. The dry signal has the full transients. The wet signal, the transients are kind of pushed way down. So let me just show you what I mean by that. I have EQ8. This is Ableton's stock EQ, one of them. And I've already dialed in a curve here. So let's just kind of hear what that sounds like. Let's bring the blend control down about where we want it. Let's say 75. So what this EQ is adding, if I take it away, this is the parallel compression only. Now with the EQ. So what I've done with this EQ is I've rolled off the high frequencies a little bit, because I felt that with the compressor, the snare was starting to, with the body of the snare coming through more strongly, some of those high frequencies were high, the high mids and the high frequencies were starting to feel like a little too much. So I'm rolling that off in the compressed signal. And what's cool about that is that we're shaping the tone without really touching the transients much. So the transients are going to keep some of that snap in the high frequencies, but we're going to kind of darken the signal overall to kind of, because those high frequencies are starting to build up a little bit in a way that I didn't really like. A similar thing in the low end, the compressor was causing the low frequencies to build up a little bit, and the low end was getting kind of muddy feeling. And so by dialing back some of that low end, again, we're just removing the low end from the compressed signal. And so the dry signal, which is more dynamic, is continuing to come through with the low end. So we're kind of shifting the tone, but also restoring some of the dynamics to the low end at the same time. And then in addition to that, I added a kind of a mid-range boost here. This just kind of brought out something in the bass that I liked. Let's hear it without that. And then with. Okay, so just some tone shaping kind of stuff. So what you can see is that while we're doing this parallel compression, we have an opportunity to just kind of shift the tone of the track in a direction that we like, either to address something the compressor is doing that maybe we don't care for, like the high frequencies coming through a bit much, or the low end getting a bit muddy, but also just to kind of bring out something in the low level sounds, the kind of medium and low level sounds that we want to hear more of. So we want to hear more of that sustain in the bass track, and especially in this frequency, it just kind of comes through with a little bit of grit that I felt sounded really good. Let's just hear this again. This is the dry signal. No compression, no EQ, just the dry. And then this is our fully processed signal. Dry. process. So everything just feels like really kind of glued together, and the dynamics are a little bit more controlled. The snare isn't cracking through quite so much, but it just kind of is now sitting a bit better into the body of the sound. So that's what you would use SendBlender for. While I have it open here, let's just go ahead and do a walkthrough of the controls, and I can explain how this works. So we've already seen the blend control. It's a wet dry mix knob. It's all it is. It's no different from the one in the compressor, but this one lets us work on the entire effects chain that we're dealing with. You see above this is the input section here. This gives us a LUFS reading on the dry signal and the wet signal respectively. So you can see these kind of track up where around 24, 25 LUFS short term on both sides. We have this match button. Now I had the compressor already level matched, but let's say that I hadn't done that. I'll just kind of turn off my makeup gain here. This match button basically will automatically match those levels for us by setting this wet trim level to get the same loudness on both the wet and dry inputs. This is a time saver for some people. It really depends on your workflow, you know, kind of if you like to level match by ear or if you like the automatic. It's there if you need it, and it's very handy. I will say that. This does have this has a latching mode, which is pretty interesting, especially if you're working with an effect that maybe creates a shift in tone, but also as a side effect that really dramatically affects the level of the wet signal. If you hold down Command on Mac or Control on Windows, this will turn on and stay on. And so I have that turned on now. So now you'll see when I play this, this is continuously matching the levels between the wet and dry signals. So if I were to do a filter sweep, like just kind of sweep this down on the wet side, you'll see that it's going to bring that wet signal up because we lost a lot of level when I swept that down. So it'll keep the wet and dry signal matched while you're kind of playing with things, you know, with a more radical kind of effect that adjusts the level quite a bit. It'll keep those levels signal matched anyway. I'm going to switch this back off and put my compressor makeup back up. All right, so these are level matched again just on the compressor. So now down below the blend control, you saw me use this bypass control here. Now this bypass control actually bypasses the entire wet signal processing chain. So you can see when I hit this, now we're getting all dry signal. Okay, no compression, no EQ, anything. So this is really handy for just kind of evaluating if your processing is doing what you want it to do. Down here below the blend and bypass, there's the dry and wet attenuation is shown here. Basically, when you change this blend control, that's going to attenuate the wet and dry signals by a certain amount in order to keep them maintain your overall level while adjusting, you know, both input signals. So this just shows you how much each signal is being attenuated. You can adjust these directly, and what that does, it basically just sets the blend level in order to achieve that attenuation on that side. The blend control is basically the primary control, but if for some reason you have something in particular in mind, like you know you want to bring this down by 2 dB, that'll show you the blend level that is required to achieve that. There's a swap button here. Normally, the wet signal comes in on the main input to the plugin, and the dry signal comes into the side chain that we routed earlier. If you're experimenting with a different kind of routing setup, the swap button is here to kind of flip those. So the wet signal comes in on the side chain and the dry signal comes in on the main input. Most of the time, you'll probably want to leave that off. But if you are doing something a little out of the ordinary, that swap button is there to kind of support different workflows. And then finally, at the bottom here, there's a crossfade shape control. So what this does, it changes the curve of the crossfade. Well, what I mean by crossfade is as we move through the blend range from 0, which is completely dry, to 100, which is completely wet, the attenuation on those channels basically follows a particular curve. we're currently using the linear curve, which basically means that at 50% blend, both sides are attenuated by about 6 dB. And some people may know this, some people may not, but that basically is just cutting those signals in half. So with the linear setting at 50% blend, both sides are cut in half in terms of amplitude. This is what you're going to want to use for most compressors and saturators and things like that. These are what we call correlated signals. Correlated signals are signals that when you add them together, they tend to reinforce each other, and so your level is consistent with a linear blend for correlated signals. If you're working with what we would call uncorrelated signals, this would be something like a reverb or a delay usually. Because the reverb and delay effect kind of stretches the sound out over time, the waveforms are no longer lining up with each other just right. So it's no longer correlated. For most reverbs, you're going to use the power setting. And you'll see when I set this to 50% on the power setting in the center, now the attenuation on both sides is just 3 dB. So what that means effectively is that we're kind of getting a 3 dB boost in the middle of the control. And that's because when we blend uncorrelated signals, our perception is they kind of lose intensity when you're kind of blending them equally. So that boost just kind of helps to combat that perception and keep things feeling about level matched throughout the entire range of the blend control. And then last at the bottom here, we have this max setting. And so what that does is in the center of the blend range, you'll see there's actually no attenuation at all on either the dry or wet signals. This is similar to how the crossfade control on a DJ mixer might work, where you would use it in a mixing context. If you have like a longer delay or reverb, where now you're blending signals that are not only like less correlated, they are getting to a point where they don't reinforce each other at all. They really don't have a lot of in common in a way, at least in terms of timing. And so in that case, you may want to use this max setting. This is probably the one you'd use less often, but for longer reverbs and delays, it can be useful. Basically, the way to kind of think about this is if you are running through the blend range and you feel like you're losing intensity in the middle of the range, that's when to switch this setting. Again, for compressors, saturators, things like that, where we're not really stretching the signal out in time, you're going to want to keep it on the linear setting. So for this parallel compression use case that we're showing here, the linear setting really is the best setting. Okay, so that's SendBlender. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. You can go to the website, minordrama.studio, and there's contact information there. We do have a Discord server. You're more than welcome to join. I'm happy to take questions there over email, really, and anywhere you can get in touch with me, just feel free to do that. SendBlender is a free plugin. We do have a more advanced version called SendBlender Pro, and I will be covering that in a separate video. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and like I said, get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks.